Hello. Hello. Katie, feel free to keep letting people in if that's
Yeah, I will do. Hi, everybody.
Hello. Nice to see some familiar names. Hi, Gemma. Hi, Jitan. Hi, Theo. Those of you I know. And also hi to those I don't know. You get a hello too. Lovely to see you. So we're waiting for a few more. So while we're waiting, I'd love to hear what brought you here, what you're interested in about peer-led approaches, what's kind of, what hat you're wearing as you come to this. It'd be lovely to hear a little bit more. And we'll just give the others a bit more time to join. So hello, welcome for those of you who are just signing in now. Hi Alice, hi Kareem. We are just waiting for a few more, and so people are heading to the chat and sharing what's brought them here and what they're interested in about peer-led approaches, what's kind of piqued your interest in it. Lovely. That's very cool. And that's fine, yeah. Please do eat lunch. Thea was just saying she's heating up her soup. That's highly encouraged. Eating is encouraged.
Oh, awesome, Rima. I did year here back in the day in 2014. Hello.
Right, I'm gonna turn down my music, much as I love playing DJ. And shall we make a start, Katie? And then I'm sure others will be.
Yeah, I'll keep letting people in.
Yeah, great. So I will share my screen, and feel free, if you're still writing your intro, who you are, feel free to carry on doing that. And welcome. So this Lunch and Learn event hosted by Huddlecraft is all about introducing some of the fundamentals of peer-led approaches, which is what we specialise in. And a warm welcome from us, the team. So we're not all here, but I'm Kate, I'm here, and we've also got Katie, and Annika and Zara are part of the Huddlecraft team as well, who send their warm wishes to you all. And just a little quick note about my journey into Huddlecraft. So I was actually a participant on one of their programs in, I think, 2018, or maybe, 2018. And that was, I was participating in what was called the Learning Marathon, and I was a group of 12 people, and we all had an individual learning journey that we were exploring together. And what was really exciting for me about that, I've always done a lot of work in kind of facilitation and learning and development, but for me that was a real turning point in understanding the power of collaboration and what happens when you create the conditions for a group of kind of really curious minds to thrive individually and collectively. And now I work as an associate for Huddlecraft, which means that I deliver lots of their programs, and I'm leading on Huddlecraft 101, which is taking place in November and December, which I know is kind of interest in that is what's brought many of you here, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. Katie, do you want to say quickly who you are?
Sure. So my relationship with Huddlecraft is similar to Kate's. I always wonder how confusing it is to have two white brunette women called Kate and Katie on the same call, so sorry about that. I took part in a peer group, so a huddle, in 2017 and loved it so much I re-enrolled. Actually, I think that was 2018, re-enrolled in 2019, hosted one in 2021, and I now work for Huddlecraft as the design lead, so I do a lot of visual design and their social media and comms, but I'm a total convert as well. I think once you've been in a peer-led space, it's really hard to go back to a more hierarchical one. So I love this way of learning and want to do it for life.
Great, thanks Katie. And I know that some of you might have just joined, and please feel free to share in the chat kind of what's brought you here, your interest, your context, what you're thinking about peer-led approaches. It's really lovely to hear that, and for each other to hear who's here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who Huddlecraft is and what we do, and then we're going to give you a taste today of some of our methodology for peer-to-peer approaches. So we often talk about Huddlecraft as being an organisation that supports people to take steep learning curves together. And I love this image of the little birds navigating winter together. I have to say, I feel closer to being that cold today than I have all year. And I guess what we mean by steep learning curves here is what you might be facing in your organisations, in your teams, in your communities, but also collectively as humanity, the kind of the level of learning curve that we need to go on in order to navigate the complex challenges facing us on planet Earth, whether that's climate change, economic crises, increased polarisation and disconnection. In order to navigate that, in order to find a way through that, we need to go on a steep learning curve together. And that is really at the heart of what we try and do as Huddlecraft. And we have 3.5 pillars that underpin that way of working. These kind of pillars or beliefs really shape the way we respond to those steep learning curves. The first being, we believe that people can learn to thrive together on our finite planet. And the learn bit there is really important. It doesn't just happen. There has to be a space for learning how to do that and how to do that with each other. We know that human potential to learn is infinite, and we know that from neuroscience, we know that from all sorts of different experiences we've had, and that science has shown the capacity to learn and develop is infinite. And lastly, we see how huddles, and that's our word for peer groups, how they unearth potential that people can't unearth alone. And I think that really speaks to the experience I had as when I was part of a huddle a few years ago. It really was that the things I was able to achieve in that 6 months would never have happened if I'd not been part of that group. But, and this is the half the pillar, craft is required to do that. So as all of you will know from your various different experiences of work and context or your own lives, you can't just throw people in a room together and hope for the best. There is a craft to how collaboration occurs, to how coming together as a group occurs. And that's where our name comes from, Huddlecraft. So huddle meaning to come together as a group, and the craft being that exercise, that capacity, that skill in making the coming together. Some of you might have previously known us as Enroll Yourself. So we have been through a brand change, a name change, but some of you might have come across us as Enroll Yourself before. We're the same organisation, same people, just different name. Katie, anything you want to add so far? Please feel free to jump in. Okay, she's keeping stumm. All right, so a little bit about what our work looks like in practice then. So we talk about our work in kind of 2 ways, this kind of symbiotic relationship. We have the huddles that we host, where we support people through our host fellowship to train up as hosts of huddles, and they bring together peer groups in their own communities. We've got people running peer groups all over the world, and they bring people together and they take them on a learning journey individually, collectively. And it's through the running of those huddles that we have a real capacity, I suppose, to absorb learning around our practice, around the craft of huddles. And that's kind of the roots, I suppose, of our work. And then coming out of that, some of the branches, if we can use the kind of the metaphor of the tree, we also have our studio work. And so what that looks like is lots of different work with organisations, with different projects, where we support people to embed peer-to-peer approaches. And a couple of examples of that, I'm not going to go into these in loads of details. I had a partnership with Civic Square in Birmingham, who many of you might have come across, where we have been supporting people to set up a very different kind of book group in their neighbourhoods around the book Donut Economics, which some of you might have come across. And so in that situation, we've been working with Civic Square to embed peer-to-peer approaches to learn around economics, to learn around how we might engage with economics and economic systems differently in our neighbourhoods. We've also worked and partnered with Government Digital Service, GDS, which was around supporting peer-to-peer approaches in service design. And we've also collaborated with Friends of the Earth as well on our programme called Money Movers, which I'll talk about a little bit more later on. And Money Movers is empowering women to take action for the planet through making changes with their finances. And so I'm just going to kind of plant the seed for this now, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later on. But one of the reasons why we're running these cases, one of the reasons why we're sharing our approach in this way, is that there's a deeper way to dive into how we work, which is a 3-day immersive training running across 4 weeks in November and December. So it's delivered over a series of half-day or 2-hour sessions. We've still got a few spots left for that, not loads, but we've still got a few spots. And so, yeah, if you like what you're hearing today, feel free to stick around at the end and we can chat more about the training and how to apply. All right, so onto the juice, onto our 5 levels of peer-led approaches. And we describe it in this spiral, or the snail, as I feel like it is colloquially called among the team.
Known as the snail.
Yeah, exactly. And we talk about the 5 levels: self, pairs, groups, interventions, and ecosystems. And this way of thinking about peer-to-peer approaches is our, really our methodology for how we craft bringing people together. So I'm going to talk about each of them fairly quickly, and I'm conscious that we're trying to pack a lot into 45 minutes, so I'll try and pace my voice. But starting with the self, and it might feel weird in a way to think about the self when we're talking about peer groups, when we're talking about huddles, but the self is the core ingredient of any peer group. So any peer group is made up of a number of selves, a number of individuals. And when you are asking people to collaborate, when you're creating a space for people to come together and to do things together, the individuals can no longer just be passive recipients. Actually, their intrinsic motivation, their connection to why those people are coming together really matters. And so understanding how you can tap into that intrinsic motivation, how you can engage people in that individual level, is a really important part of the craft of bringing people together. And also thinking about your own self-awareness as, a host or as someone who might be bringing together a group of people. What are the roles that you might default to playing in a peer group? And how can you challenge yourself to change up some of those roles, to kind of default away from the roles you might normally play and challenge yourself to take on different roles, different personas, so you can begin to see yourself collective, as part of a collective or as part of a whole. And many of you will already have ways of doing this. And on our training program, what we do is support you through thinking about a number of different tools and techniques for engaging with the self, whether that's you as the self or the individuals within your group setting. So we're going to have a play with this, and I'm going to drop a link into the chat and invite you to open up this link. And this is a resource we've created to help with thinking about roles in a peer group, called our Enroll Cards. And what I'm going to invite you to do is just to have a quick scan through the roles. I can see lots of you joining now. And if you head down to slide 5, you'll see all of the roles together. And just take a couple of minutes to think, what are the roles that you normally play when you come together in a group of people, whether that's your friends or a work team or your family? What's a role that you usually play? And what's a role that you'd love to challenge yourself to step up to take more? And just by way of an example, I definitely default to playing the nurturer. So I'll often in a group setting be the person who's looking out for, how are people feeling? How are people doing? Has everyone got everything they need? And a role that I would love to challenge myself to be much more, to play much more in the space, is someone probably being much more of the problem solver. So I'm looking at the tech wizard. I definitely have a tendency to offer that role to someone else rather than to step up to have those skills and tools myself. So that's just a little example. But I'll give you a minute or so to have a think for yourself. What's a role you tend to play? And what's a role that you'd like to challenge yourself to play more? Thank you, Rima, for the thumbs up. Lovely, lovely. Don't worry, Katie, I've got breakout rooms, they're done. So I'm going to pop you into a breakout room with just one or two others, and it's just a chance to say hi, just to connect, and to share what's a role that jumps out at you that you think you typically play, and what's a role that you'd like to challenge yourself to play more. And we're just going to have 3 minutes of chat. It's not going to be loads of chat, and then we'll come back together, and just opening up those rooms now. Welcome back, welcome back. I'm really curious, this wasn't in the plan, but I'd love it if you could write in the chat the role that you find yourself playing most often. I'm just curious to see if there's a trend among who wanted to come to this taster and the roles that we all typically play. Oh, cool. Alice, I'm with you. Okay, great. We've got a great selection of roles. We would be a great peer group, guys. We'd be smashing it. Love that. I hope you had a nice little connection with each other. I'm gonna zoom straight on to thinking about the next kind of level of our spiral. So thinking about pairs. So we've talked about the self and that as a kind of component for peer groups, and then thinking about the next level up, pairs. And I guess you will all see this in different ways. You'll see this play out in different ways in your work, but groups and communities are always built on the strength of their smaller units. And so actually, if you've got a group of 8, a group of 12, how those individuals connect to each other in a one-to-one way is really, really important for how that then escalates to the overall sense of support and trust and connection at the larger group level. So spending time crafting peers is a really helpful building block for supporting collaboration and peer groups at a wider level. And this can look like all sorts of things, as you'll know. You'll be able to think of formal one-to-one relationships like therapy or coaching or mentoring or counselling, consulting. All of those have different ways of distributing power and different ways of relating. And one of the things we talk about a lot when we're thinking about pair work is the power of peer coaching. And so in lots of our work, we are supporting people to understand the basics of peer coaching in order to support that as a tool to help people come to their own conclusions, to find their own solutions, and to be accountable to themselves and to each other in a peer group in order to take action. And the approach you might use with pairs really depends on your overall goal and what you're trying to do. And actually, Katie, I wonder if I can ask you to speak to this as a core member of the Huddlecraft team, how we use pairs across the team.
Sure. So this diagram represents our host fellowship program. So we, as a team, are quite a small team of 3. And we have 5 or 6 host mentors around us who then support 20 hosts. And we use mentoring and buddying as a way of sort of rippling out support in a fairly distributed way. You can imagine if every piece of support had to go through 3 people, that ratio of 3 to 20 is just too big and we'd block people. But actually bringing in more people and spreading out those relationships means that we can move a lot quicker, information flows better, and everyone can receive much more kind of personal support. So the blue dots in these diagrams are hosts, and then beyond that, the green dots are the people who take part in their huddles. So actually a core team of 3 can connect with, I think this diagram represents 200 participants in huddles. So yeah, those small personal relationships of pairs are a really fundamental way to bring in like personalized, intimate support into like big networks of people.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think is really interesting is in the core team at Huddlecraft, rather than any kind of formal line management approach, you take an approach of stewardship, don't you? So there'll be different combinations of people who hold stewarding sessions for each other, which is another way, it's just an interesting creative way of thinking about how one-to-one relationships might support accountability and support and, a strength of connection, really.
And what's interesting too is that principle of coaching, that idea that the person in front of you is capable of amazing things, really then ripples through the whole system. It's interesting how making or enacting high quality relationships at the micro level becomes systemic.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. Would you like to talk a little bit about groups?
Yes, I will. So the bread and butter of Huddlecraft has always been peer groups. We actually began when Zara, our founder, couldn't find the kind of learning experience that she wanted. So she recruited her own peer group, which was then called the Learning Marathon, which is essentially a journey for 12 people, all with their own questions, supporting and pooling resources, supporting each other, pooling resources as they go. And over time, as we've done this more and more, we've understood how peer groups are incredibly powerful for learning spaces, but also they're good for healing, unlearning, taking action, and for having a good time. We have some sort of specific, I guess over time we've learned more about the anatomy of a peer group, and that there's something about a maximum of 12 people that's powerful, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But generally they need a defined purpose and this understanding that everyone in the peer group is an equal participant. Everyone is responsible for the space, even if it is hosted and initiated by one person, and that there are lots of there's a web of relationships within that group. It's not a teacher and a set of passive students. So I think we've got a case study here, Kate. So
sorry, you just talked about that.
Probably covered a bit of that. We'll share the slides afterwards if you want to dive into this stuff a bit deeper. But yeah, we've developed a set of case studies that talk about the empirical reasoning or the evidence behind peer groups and peer-to-peer approaches. And this is a really interesting study from the United States that looked at 2 housing estates in the same area with a similar demographic population. And one of them totally failed and one of them succeeded. And basically the structure of the housing estate, Pruitt Ego, that failed was that there were hundreds of families in the same block with one communal space, a large kind of floor for events and parties. And while these are pretty high quality when people moved in, it didn't take long for them to get trashed. And the estate that was kind of next door, which had much smaller sort of building blocks with 12 houses around a communal garden, was kind of maintained really well and sort of flourished as an estate. And the analysis of that basically latches onto the idea that when people can see and create a relationship with the people they're surrounded with, there's a level of accountability, there's a level of visibility that leads to people looking after things and caring for spaces and one another. But where there's anonymity and people don't know your name, your behavior is radically different. So yeah, we've got a set of these case studies that talk through examples like that and try and make sense of why a peer-to-peer works.
Yeah, and just something I was going to add, which I feel like maybe I haven't lifted out so far, or kind of just to speak to this group piece. The first is about disrupting traditional power dynamics. And I think what's really powerful about a lot of the methodology that underpins how we craft bringing people together is this idea of really rejecting traditional hierarchies, and really, Katie spoke to them, the idea that everyone is responsible. And that can feel really radical, actually, especially if you're trying to introduce that inside an organization that is that's not used to working in that way. And we've talked a lot about our huddles and the different ways we've seen them work, but a lot of the work we do in organizations is often about culture change. It's about using peer groups as a catalyst for shifting ways of being. And we did a really interesting piece of work with the NHS last year, which, as you know, lots of you will know, is a highly hierarchical institution as an organisation. And we were trying to use some of our frameworks for thinking about peer-to-peer working to disrupt some of those traditional ways of being, as a way of inviting people to relate to each other differently in the workplace. Thanks, Katie. So I'm going to move on to talking about interventions, which is the next kind of part of our snail. So we've talked about self, peer, pairs, groups, and now we're talking about interventions. And really this level of our spiral is all about the strategic application of peer-led approaches. So what are your goals, and how might peer-to-peer relating fuel those goals and enable you to meet those goals that you have? And that last case study, I think, shows this on a kind of micro and macro level, that this isn't just about people having a nice time. It's not just about people learning together, but actually when you apply this methodology really strategically in the context of the goals of your work, it can lead to better social outcomes, better environmental outcomes, you know, increased sense of connection, all of these different things that, as we talked about at the very beginning, we know are necessary in order for us to navigate the complexity of humanity and where we're at. And so one example of how we've used peer-to-peer approaches just in that way is through our programme Money Movers, which is the programme I mentioned earlier, the partnership with Friends of the Earth. And the challenge, or the kind of design challenge here, is really thinking about how can we make it simpler to take climate action with our personal finances. And so much of the context of finances and investment is not beneficial for the planet. The opposite of that, it's harmful for the planet. So this partnership with Friends of the Earth, between the Friends of the Earth and Huddlecraft, was about supporting women to get friends or colleagues together to tackle climate action with their finances. And the way that works, let's imagine Zara is our host. So she signs up and trains as a Money Movers host. She gathers 4 to 5 women from her work and all her life. She hosts 3 Money Movers sessions, for which she has the resources and the succession plans, the facilitation guides. And then all of that group take some actions and measure the impact of what they're doing. And so this started off as a very small pilot a few years ago, and we're now running this programme in all sorts of contexts in the community, but also with corporate partners like Deloitte. So we're sort of really growing the number of peer groups around Money Movers that are taking place. And so far, we've had 140 women move £1.2 million, which in the grand scheme of money is not that much. But when you imagine, you know, how that could be scaled and how that could transform the amount of actions that people could take and the amount of money that could be divested and could be supported actually to take positive actions for the climate. And I was one of these women, I'm proud to say. So I hosted my own group. Katie, were you as well? We're such fans.
I'm such fans. I participated. I didn't host.
Oh, you were a participant, cool. Yeah. And I do think like it was a really amazing program to be part of, and it made me engage in my finances in a way I never would have otherwise. And I guess it harks back to that idea of how potential is changed when you are doing something with other people. There's no way I'd have sat down and done research into my pension provider unless I was doing that alongside other people. And so, yeah, the aspiration for this programme is to try and move £1 billion by 2030 through the power of peer groups. And if this is like exciting for you, contact me, because we'll be recruiting people to take part in this programme as a separate thing at another point. So if you feel excited about Money Movers, definitely get in touch.
Just to say on that point, what is interesting about Money Movers is how the design decisions that you take when you're thinking about interventions or using peer-led approaches through interventions is really interesting. So with Money Movers, they're very small groups. So it's 3 or 4 women rather than 12. And there's something about that intimacy that really helps people be quite honest about their financial situation, to maybe share things that they wouldn't otherwise. And there's that real feeling of accountability of getting together over 3 sessions where you are motivated to take action. Like I started a pension on that program as a freelancer, so it's very cool.
Yeah, nice. Thank you, Katie. And I guess this just hopefully illustrates that point. I guess thinking about peer groups in a slightly different way. So yes, we might be talking about bringing people together around learning or increasing collaboration at work, or we might be talking about tackling the climate crisis through supporting women to take action with their finances. So hopefully that illustrates this idea of interventions and how peer groups at an intervention level, what then might be possible. And the last part of our spiral is what we describe as the ecosystem. And we use a water analogy for when we think about the ecosystem, which we would describe as the context that we're living and working in. And when we think about water, you can't always see the currents in the water around you, but the currents will affect what direction you can swim in, how easy it is to swim through the water. And so in the context of peer groups, we can think of the ecosystem, the currents in the ecosystem, as being sometimes hidden, sometimes very visible, different things at play that might be affecting how easy it is for people to come together. So that might be things like power dynamics, it might be things like governance, it might be things like belief systems or attitudes to race or gender or class. And so all of these different currents of the ecosystem that you're working in will have an impact on how easy it is to bring people together and some of the other hurdles that people might have to be working with or swimming against in order to connect and collaborate in the way that we're describing.
And on that point as well, what's interesting about Money Movers is that the research done by Friends of the Earth showed that women have a growing share of personal wealth, but they have much less confidence in making financial decisions than men. And so it's not information that they need, but they need these small, like intimate spaces to build their confidence and make decisions, find out information, bring it back, talk about it. So yeah, that's an interesting way that you can tap into this sort of ecosystem level and then make design decisions about peer approaches.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. And some of these currents that we're describing or you're thinking about here might be macro things. The cost of living crisis might be a current that is at play right now for you in your personal or professional context. But there might also be specific currents that are unique to the ecosystem that you are part of. And so how those kind of micro currents and macro currents interplay is also part of thinking about the conditions for people coming together, the conditions of a peer group. And I just want to give you a minute or so now, just to take a moment for yourselves and think about your own context. Think about where you would like to apply peer-to-peer approaches. And think about the currents in your own context that are helping you towards your goals, that are helping you think about, helping you move towards the goals that you're trying to achieve. And where might you be swimming against the currents? So what examples of different currents might be taking you off course and away from your goals? We're not going to share this. I just want to give you a moment to reflect and think about the ecosystem of your own context. What currents might be helping you swim towards your goals and what currents might be taking you off course? And if there's a reflection you'd like to share, feel free to put it in the chat, but there's no obligation to do that. Another 20 seconds or so. Sally, cool. So let me go back to that slide. And so what we support people to do when thinking about this kind of methodology of the craft of huddling, and what we support people to do is to critically engage in the ecosystem that they are part of, and to really reflect and think on how those different currents might play out in bringing people together. And so what can be done to support people to really craft equitable spaces in how they're bringing people together, to support people to show up in a way they might not be able to be, they might not be able to elsewhere. We've talked already a little bit about disrupting power dynamics, and I guess that's one of the ways the ecosystem and the craft of bringing people together might intersect. Katie, anything else you want to say on this before we move on?
No, let's move on.
Lovely. So we're coming into the last kind of 5 minutes of our session. And as I mentioned at the start, there's the opportunity to more deeply immerse yourself into the craft of huddling. So we are running our Huddlecraft 101 training over 4 weeks from the 8th of November to the 5th of December. And so it kind of totals up as a 3-day training, but it's delivered over 7 2-hour sessions. And so this is an opportunity for you to learn much more about the power of peer-led approaches. Imagine what we've just done in the last 40 minutes, but like deeply. So we go deep into each part of the spiral. We use tools and techniques. We've shown you just one of those today with the roll cards, but we have lots of different resources and tools that we use. We'll be supporting you to think about how you might use those in your context. But the thing that I think is like the most cool about this training, obviously I'm biased, but I do think it's really cool, is that you're also part of a peer group yourself. So over the course of those 7 sessions, you're part of a cohort of people. And so you experientially learn, some of these techniques for working in a peer-to-peer way through relating to the other people on the training. So we'll be modeling so much of the techniques that we're supporting you to use through how we work with you on the training. And Katie, I'll ask you to drop the link in the chat where people can apply. You can also book a call with me if you've got questions. I'll also stick around at the end in case anyone wants to hang on and ask any questions specifically about the training. But the deadline to apply for that is the 25th of October, and we've got a few spots left. I don't know if this is on a further slide, but I'll say it now. There's also there's discounts if you're applying in groups of more than 3, and also discounts for organisation places as well. So you can look at all of that on the website. And then just to whet your appetite further, if you've enjoyed some of the resources we've shown you, or some of kind of the essence of what we've shared today, we have lots of free resources you can play with on our website. We mentioned earlier that we used to be called Enroll Yourself. We're now called Huddlecraft. So you might see a different brand, you'll see a different look to some of these resources, but they're all free to download and use. And I use lots of them in my work all the time. So I'd really recommend checking them out, even if it's like you've got a team meeting coming up and you really need something interesting to do because you've done the same thing for 6 weeks in a row. You might find something there that can just help stimulate a bit of a different way of connecting with each other. And then lastly, the roll cards, which the link should still be in the chat, but I'll get Katie to maybe to repost it if you can. My invitation to you off the back of today is to think of one team, one project, or one organisation you're involved with. It could be your own family. I don't know why I keep talking about families today, but maybe that's in my head. And think about how you might use these cards to distribute power and responsibility. So how might you use these cards, use this resource to help support people to engage in accountability, responsibility, the power they have in a peer group in a slightly different way? What might that look like? In the training, in the Huddlecraft 101 training, we'll talk much more about the different ways we've used this resource. But one of the great things about it is that there's no right or wrong way to use them. So if you can see an obvious way to pick one of these out and to play with it, absolutely go away and do that. And we really invite that kind of participatory way of engaging with our resources. So that's my invitation to you off the back of today. And yeah, last kind of call around Huddlecraft 101. Like I said, I'll hang on now in case anyone's got questions around that. And a massive thank you for coming. It's been really lovely to have you all. Katie, any last words from you?
That slide had your old email address. I'm going to put your new one in the chat.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
The rebrand is never done.
The rebrand is never done. Kate@huddlecraft.com. Yeah, great. Thank you so much, everyone. We are bang on 12:45, and I'm sure you've got many things to do. So feel free to go, and I'll stick around if anyone's got any other questions.